afternoon, everybody. Thank you all for coming along. It is obviously a very big conference here, and I am very happy that so many people want to hear what I have to say. I am being translated, of course. I would like to say thank you to the interpreter. I will have my own headphones later on when I take some questions from the audience. Yeah, later on. But for now, I am trusting the interpreter to help you to understand what I have to say. Could I have my slides, please? Great, thank you. So today I am going to try to explain what we do at Sense Research Foundation and what we are also doing at Ajax Therapeutics and what other people are doing at many other companies. Because this is an incredibly exciting time for this field. We are really close now to the point where we can bring aging under medical control. Now, I have been to Moscow many times before, and I have talked about this field, of course, but when I have been here in the past, I could not be nearly so optimistic. I could say many things about what will happen in the future, but it was still the distant future. Now we are getting closer. We are really getting closer to making this happen. I really believe that most of the people in this room today will never suffer from the health problems of late life that we see in so many people right now. I really believe that. But still, some of you will. And therefore, the priority that we have today is to make these therapies happen as soon as we possibly can. We have to always remember that aging kills 100,000 people every day. That is more than 2/3 of all deaths worldwide. I mean, it's by far the biggest problem in the world. We often think to ourselves, well, HIV is a really big problem. And sure, it is a really big problem. Malaria is a really big problem. Both of those things kill thousands of people every day, millions of people every year. But nothing kills 100,000 people a day except aging. So we absolutely need to remember that aging is the #1 problem. And the reason that I'm here today, and the reason Sense Research Foundation is here today, is because not only do we know that this is the #1 problem, we also know how we should be able to solve it. It's a very difficult problem to solve, that's for sure, but it's a problem that we can solve. We just don't know how soon we can solve it, but we do know that the harder we try, the sooner it will happen. And that means that we need people's support from the whole world. Now in Russia, there is a lot of support for this. Every time I come here, I get enormous feedback, enormous support for this work, and I love coming here for that. I hate the traffic, but I love the people, right? And that's why. Okay, here goes. So, I'm a technologist. I started my life as a computer scientist. I was working on artificial intelligence. back in the 1980s. And I did that because I felt that we really need to help people to enjoy their lives. And at the moment, most people have to spend most of their waking hours doing things that they would not do unless they were being paid for it. They have to work. That's ridiculous. We should have machines to do things that people don't want to do, and then we can do the things that we do want to do, to enrich each other's lives, things like that. But eventually I found out that hardly anybody was working on aging. And so I started to work on it. And I started to work on it like a technologist, somebody who is not only interested in finding things out, I'm interested in finding out the things that are useful. In other words, I'm interested in using what we know for humanitarian benefit. So, this question that I'm showing you on this slide was the first step in all of that. I said, well, okay, why do we have an aging problem right now? 200 years ago, people started to figure out how to keep people from dying early in life, in infancy or in childbirth. And they did it really well. We figured out, hygiene is a really good idea. And vaccines, antibiotics, really simple medicines, they really worked. So 200 years ago, even in the wealthiest countries in the whole world, we would have maybe more than 1/3 of babies dying before the age of 1. And they would die from, tuberculosis or diphtheria, that kind of thing. So, we don't have that anymore. Even in the relatively developing countries, the amount of death from things like that is really low compared to what it used to be. And we did it really easily. So it's a really important question why the health problems that we see in late life have not been able to be eliminated by medicine. People don't, it's an obvious question, so perhaps it's so obvious that people don't ask it enough, but it is the important question. Now, most people think they know the answer to that question. They think it's this I'm showing you here. So don't worry, you're not supposed to be able to read this slide, right? This is simply to show you that there are so many things that go wrong with people late in life. And they go wrong at more or less the same time, which means, of course, that they interact with each other. They exacerbate each other. So most people think that it's just the complexity, that there are so many things going wrong with people late in life that, medicine has just not been able to bring it under control. There are just too many things to tackle at the same time. And for sure, that is part of the answer. But it's only part of the answer. There's actually a bigger part, which I need to explain to you. And I'm going to start by telling you what aging is. Now, think about that. Why do I need to tell you what aging is? It's crazy that I would need to tell you that, because aging has been a huge preoccupation of humanity since the beginning of civilization. But still, if you ask 10 people for a definition of aging, you'll get at least 8 different answers. It's insane. We haven't decided what aging is. So here's my definition of aging. And I have 2 reasons for giving you this particular definition. The first reason is we need some definition so that I can spend the rest of my time here so that we're on the same page and you understand what I'm saying when I use the word aging. But the other reason I'm using this definition is it's a really good definition. It's a definition that demystifies aging. It helps you to see that aging is not some kind of enigma, some kind of thing we badly don't understand. We really do understand aging well. All right, so let's look at this. What am I actually saying here? What I'm saying here is simply that aging is the combination of two processes, the left-hand one and the right-hand one. On the left, we have a process that goes on throughout life where metabolism creates damage. So that means simply metabolism is the entire network of processes that keeps us alive from one day to the next. Really complicated, keeps us alive. That process generates changes to the molecular and cellular structure of the body, the composition of the body. And those changes are progressive. They accumulate over time. Now, the body is set up to tolerate that, up to a point, to tolerate a certain amount of that change. And that is why people who are in their 40s or 50s, like me, are pretty much as functional as people in their 20s. Nothing has really gone wrong yet for most people at that age. But the reason why it is appropriate to call these changes damage is because eventually they accumulate to a point that the body is not set up to tolerate. Eventually, the body starts to really notice this damage and it works less well. And less well over time, the pathologies, the progressive, chronic pathologies of old age start to emerge and they get worse and eventually they kill you. That's the right-hand process. So that's all that aging is, the combination of those two processes. Throughout life, metabolism creates damage, and late in life, damage creates pathology. That's all you need to know about what aging is. So, what do we do about it? Well, of course, the goal is to separate metabolism from pathology. What we would like is that we could live. Obviously, that means metabolism is operating. We're not asleep, we're not hibernating. We are living our lives, but we are not getting sick. So we want to separate metabolism from pathology. Now, one way that we might do that is to separate damage from pathology. And that's what I'm calling geriatrics. And that's what most people try to do. Most of the money that is spent at the moment trying to keep people healthy late in life is by that kind of thing. And it's obviously hopeless. I mean, just look at the picture. You only need this simple picture to see that geriatrics is hopeless. Because damage is continuing to accumulate. And therefore, any medicine that tries to stop damage from creating pathology is bound to get progressively less effective as time goes on, as the damage accumulates more and more. It's so obvious. So we must ask ourselves, why has humanity been so reluctant to give up on this? Hello? There we go. And this, I believe, is the answer. The reason why humanity has made this mistake and has stuck with this mistake for so long is because humanity has failed to understand what aging is. I just gave you a really simple definition of aging. But if you look at this, you will see that it does not agree with that definition. What I'm showing you here on this table is a taxonomy of sickness. In other words, the answer that most people would give if you ask them, in what ways can people be sick? All right? You ask people that question, they'll say, well, yeah, well, okay, there's infections. That's column 1. These are an important aspect of sickness. Then there are genetic diseases that a small number of people inherit from their parents. That's column 2. And then there's the big one, the diseases of old age, the chronic progressive diseases like Alzheimer's and almost all cancers, and atherosclerosis, osteoporosis, and so on. And then most people would say that there is this fourth category that's completely different. It's way out in the stratosphere, and it's called aging itself, real aging. And it's not really very well defined. It consists of things like frailty, all right? But the thing is, people think of it as so completely different from diseases that they think it's almost off limits for medicine, that there's no way, even in principle, that we would be able to develop medicines that could actually prevent it. And that's not a very good thing to be thinking if you want to actually develop such medicines. So this is a huge problem. And the thing is, it's wrong. Here, I'm showing you a different version of that same table, which is the corrected version. And if you look very closely, you will see that all the columns are exactly the same as they were on the previous slide. The only thing that is different is the position of that big, thick black line. And that is critical, because that tells you two really important things. The first thing it tells you is something I've told you already, that the so-called diseases of old age, column 3, should not be likely to be eliminated by the same kind of medicine that works for column 1, for infections. As I mentioned, we've been really successful with column 1. People hardly ever die of infections anymore early in life, at least in the industrialized world. But column 3, it hasn't worked. This is why. Column 3 is completely different from column 1. But there is a second thing that I am telling you by moving that black line, and this is an even more important thing. The other thing is that there is no difference, absolutely no difference, between column 3 and column 4. From, semantically there's a difference. That, like, column 3 consists of the aspects of aging that we have chosen to give disease-like names to. That's all. It's just terminology. Column 3 and column 4 are both aspects of aging. So a lot of people like to say that I think that aging should be considered as a disease. But that's nonsense. I don't think that at all. I think that that means that the word disease should be broadened in its definition to include aging. I think that the opposite thing should happen. I think that the definition of the word disease should be narrowed so that it does not include column 3, does not include these so-called diseases of old age. All right, now, I'm not the first person to be thinking this way. In fact, more than 100 years ago, a few smart biologists, including some Russians, came up with the idea that, geriatric medicine just isn't going to work because of exactly the reasons I've already told you. So they said, well, let's be more preventative. Let us try to slow down the creation of damage. And this was a sensible idea back then, because it was inspired by nature. What we see in nature is that different species have very different rates of aging, right? Very different. Even within a species, different individuals have slightly different rates of aging, rates of accumulation of damage. So now, maybe we could understand that. If we understood that really well, then maybe we could translate that understanding into some kind of therapy that would essentially make the human body run more cleanly, make it create damage at a slower rate than it normally does. And that would be wonderful, right? Because it would mean that it would delay the age at which the damage reaches the point that causes the right-hand process. In other words, the point where you start to get sick. Wonderful. But there are a couple of problems with that idea. The first problem is you'd better start early. Like, I'm 56 and I'm really healthy, but the fact is I'm still 56, which means that I have been accumulating damage in my body for 56 years. So that means that I've already got most of the damage that would be necessary to make me sick, to get me to exhibit the pathologies of late life. And even if today I were able to take some therapy that would slow down, maybe even slow down by a factor of 2, the rate at which I accumulate more damage, that's still not going to gain me very many years in terms of how soon I get sick. The only way you're going to gain a lot of years is if you start really early in life. That's a problem. But there's actually an even deeper problem, an even more profound one. And that's very simple to describe. Here we are. Metabolism is ridiculously complicated. If there's anyone here in the audience who writes software, right, then you can look at this and you can immediately see the problem. Right, good, yeah, there's plenty of software engineers in the audience. The problem is obvious. This is the ultimate nightmare of uncommented spaghetti code, right? There is no way in hell that we're ever going to be able to tweak this system so that it does not do the thing we don't want it to do, the creation of damage, without at the same time having unintended consequences. Stopping it from doing things that we need it to do to keep us alive. It's just not going to happen. And of course, that's a really big understatement of the problem, because all I'm showing you here is a small subset of what we know about how the body works. And even if I had the whole of what we know about the body works, that would still be an understatement, because it excludes all the enormous astronomical amount that we don't know about how the body works. And I mean, that's even ignoring all the stuff that we don't even know that we don't know, right? It's hopeless. It's never going to work. And by the 1970s or 80s, people who studied the biology of aging had realized what I've just told you. They'd pretty much given up. Gerontology was no longer a medical discipline. It had become a research area where we just wanted to understand it. It was a bit like seismology, the study of earthquakes. People who study earthquakes, they understand that earthquakes are bad for you. But, excuse me, but they really don't think they can do anything about them, right? They just say, get out of the way. We'll try to help you to know when they're going to happen. We're not going to stop them from happening. And that's, not good. So, 20 years ago almost, I came up with a completely new approach. And this approach has now become very mainstream, but it was very heretical originally. People really didn't think it made sense. So, it can be explained by use of the same diagram that I've been using all the time. We've seen that geriatric medicine, which says let's break the link between damage and pathology, just can't work. It just cannot work. And we've also seen that gerontology, which breaks the link between metabolism and damage, also cannot work. But remember, what we're trying to do is to break the link between metabolism and pathology. And there is a third way in which we can approach that, which is this thing I'm calling the maintenance approach. All that is it says, let's not try to break either of the component processes, but instead, let us separate those two processes from each other. So the maintenance approach is a damage repair approach. It says, okay, damage is going to happen. Metabolism is going to create damage. But if we go in and we repair that damage, then we may be able to stop it from reaching the level of abundance that is bad for us, that causes pathology. And we don't even need to repair it thoroughly. If we can just repair it reasonably well, that'll be good enough. So that's what I've been promoting and pursuing over the past 20 years. Now, the thing is, it's a common sense approach. You know, back here you see I called it a common sense alternative. You may think that's a bit arrogant, as if to say that other people were, you know, just being dumb in not thinking of this before. And, well, maybe that is what I'm saying. But the fact is, I think I'm justified in saying it's a common sense approach because it already works. This car here that I'm showing you, it's more than 100 years old. And it's doing fine. It's working just as well as when it was built, as the day it came off the production line. So we have to ask ourselves, why is that? And the answer is not that it was designed to last 100 years. In fact, it was probably designed to last no more than 10 or 15 years at the outside. So this is crazy. This car has completely transcended its warranty period. How? Perfectly simple. It has simply benefited from periodic, comprehensive, preventative maintenance. It has owners that fell in love with it, and they have looked after it better than most people look after their cars. Also, I don't think it had to suffer Moscow winter. So, you know, this is basically why these cars are surviving. And if it can be done with cars, it should also be possible for the human body. Now, there's just one small step, one small piece of my logic that I have not yet been able to justify. And I'm going to highlight it now. What I've shown you is that aging is not something that is some weird, you know, emergent phenomenon of living organisms. It's not like, you know, consciousness. Aging is just the same thing in the human body as what it is in a car or an aeroplane or any other normal man-made machine. And therefore, periodic, comprehensive, preventative maintenance has the capacity, the potential to keep the human body going in full function, both mental and physical, for as long as we like. We just have to figure out how to do that maintenance. But then the question has to come, how hard is it to develop this damage repair approach? And you may initially be thinking, well, it doesn't look too good. Because let's be clear, metabolism, the cause of damage, is incredibly complicated. And pathology, the consequence of damage, is also incredibly complicated. So it stands to reason that maybe the damage itself is also incredibly complicated. And if that were true, we'd be in trouble. Because, yes, this damage repair idea would still be the common sense one, but it would be impractical. So we would still have nowhere to go. It turns out, though, that that's not the case. That actually, even though damage is more complicated than it is in a car or an aeroplane, it's still manageable. And the big step forward, the big thing that allowed me to be so optimistic about this and to start promoting this approach 20 years ago, is that we can classify damage in a very manageable way. By which I mean, there may be hundreds or even thousands of types of damage, but they can all be categorized into a very manageable number of classes that I'm showing you here, just 7 classes. This, as you can see on the left-hand side, that's the definition of the categories of damage. These are real biological phenomena. So cell loss, what's that? It's simply cells dying and not being automatically replaced by the division of other cells, right? That's a very simple idea. Simply, if they're not being replaced, then the number of cells in the affected tissue will decline. It'll go down and down and down, and eventually the tissue will not have enough cells to do its job. And there are quite a few aspects of aging that are driven by that type of damage. One good example would be Parkinson's disease, which is caused by the death and non-replacement of a particular type of neuron in a particular part of the brain called the substantia nigra. So you all know how to fix that in principle. What we do is stem cell therapy. We prepare cells in the laboratory into a state where they know what to do, where they can divide and transform themselves into replacements for the cells that the body is not replacing on its own. That's what stem cell therapy is. And sure enough, now that we are pretty good in the laboratory at developing stem cells of a particular type, of a desired type, we are now in a position where we can do stem cell therapy for Parkinson's disease. And indeed, 6 clinical trials are happening right now, or they're about to happen, that will do exactly that thing. And everyone's really optimistic that we are within only a couple of years of really curing Parkinson's disease with stem cell therapy. Now, you see there's a lot more on the list, and in fact, if all of the other things on the list were as far advanced as stem cell therapy, I would not have created Sense Research Foundation. I wouldn't have needed to, but they're not. Most of the other things on this list were at a very early conceptual stage 10 years ago, and still they need work. But they have moved forward a lot over that time, and I'll talk about that some more later. However, first of all, I want to emphasize the bottom line of this slide, which is really, really important. You may already be thinking, if you're a rigorous thinker, you may already be thinking, well, hang on, Aubrey, how do you know that this really is a full, complete classification of damage in aging? Because, we're studying biology all the time. We're continuing to discover new stuff. So how do we know? And my answer is simply, we have not discovered any new type of aging, any new category of damage, for 35 years. In fact, it's now, 37 years. That's a very long time to find nothing out, a very long time. We have certainly in that time found plenty of examples of new things that fit into these categories, new examples within the categories. But we have found nothing that can actually be viewed as a new category because it does not fit into the classification. Now, another thing that you may be thinking is, well, okay, even if it is an exhaustive, a complete classification, so what? What's the use of a classification? You can obviously take 1,000 things and put them into 7 boxes in a lot of different ways. So what? The answer is the things on the right-hand side of this table. The purpose of the classification is that for each category, there is a generic approach to addressing it, to repairing it. Generic in the sense that for each example, you do more or less the same thing. So let's come back again to cell loss, the top category. I've told you that the solution is stem cell therapy, but for sure, stem cell therapy for the brain is different from stem cell therapy for the heart or the liver or the kidneys. So you may think, well, so what? The important thing is that even though those therapies are different, technologically, they have a huge amount in common. Which, in other words, once you have got 2 or 3 stem cell therapies working well, the time that it will take to get the next one working for the next tissue will be far less than the first one, because you will be able to reuse the tricks that you came up with to get the first one working. That's, of course, normal in technology, but it really needs to be pointed out here. Clustering the types of the many types of damage into a small number of categories is essential. It's absolutely the main reason why we can be so optimistic about the time frame for really bringing aging under proper control through this damage repair approach. All right, so I want to say a few more words about complexity. Because so far, all I've really said is, this is a good classification, we know what to do. But there's more to it than that. We need to actually implement all of this in the medical world. And as we all know, developing any medicine, even a really simple medicine, takes time. We have to go through a long period of clinical trials and so on, and that's going to be just the same for all of this. A lot of people are worried that clinical trials for aging are going to take even longer, maybe much longer, than clinical trials for specific diseases or disability. But I don't think we need to worry too much, because we are actually figuring things out really fast right now. First of all, there is, a really important thing, which I'm getting to in this slide, is that there is crosstalk between the types of damage. In other words, if you've got 7 types of damage, and you just fix one of them, but you fix it really well, then you may actually slow down a lot the rate at which the other types of damage are accumulating, even though you have not actually directly addressed those other types of damage. Now, even 5 years ago, I was fairly pessimistic about that. I thought, well, yes, there will be some degree of crosstalk, but really, if we fix one type of damage, we're only going to see a very small amount of slowdown of the rate of the other types. And then people came along and started getting rid of senescent cells. That was number 4 in my list. Do I have my list still? Yeah. Number three, death-resistant cells. And they found out that actually everything got a lot better. The crosstalk was much bigger than I would have expected. So that's really great news. It means that we are likely to be able to have a much bigger effect at a much earlier point, when we have got much less far along in terms of implementing all of this. Now, another thing that I want to emphasize is that the idea I'm putting forward to you today is not heresy. It's not something that I'm saying and everyone else says I'm crazy. 15 years ago, that is what was going on. When I first started talking this way, people didn't really understand how this could possibly work, and there was a lot of opposition. But now, people are just reinventing the exact same concept, and it's completely normal. So this paper came out 6 years ago. It's the exact same idea. They drew things in a bit of a different way. They split aging into 9 categories instead of 7. But it's the exact same idea. And this paper will be cited by other papers more often than any other paper in the whole of the biology of aging. It will be by far the most highly cited paper this decade. It's already got, I think, it's more like 2,500 already, and I only made this slide less than a year ago. So, this is really mainstream now. Moreover, there we go. Moreover, it emphasizes that this is medical. A lot of people like to talk about me as, the prophet of immortality, or, they focus on the longevity aspect. And of course, they do that because they need to sell papers, because they need to be sensationalist. And certainly, I do think that we are likely to see a very big increase in how long people live as a result of these therapies. But that's a side effect. Now, when I come to Russia, I don't generally find that I need to explain this very much. You all just get it far more easily than people in most parts of the world. But nevertheless, let me emphasize it, that longevity is a side effect of health. Most people die from being sick. Therefore, if you're sick, you're likely to die fairly soon. And if you're healthy, you're not likely to die anytime soon. That's all it is. So it's very frustrating when people accuse me of doing this work in order to live a long time, in order that people can live a long time, as if health was some kind of means to an end. It's not. Health is the goal, the goal. And longevity is a side effect of health. Now, the reason I have to emphasize this so much is because people are really keen to come up with excuses for aging, with, reasons why aging is some kind of blessing in disguise. They say, oh dear, if we didn't have aging, where would we put all the people? Or, wouldn't dictators live forever? Or they'll even say supposedly philosophical things like, doesn't death give meaning to life? Now, this is complete bullshit. Let's be clear, this is bullshit. So we have to ask ourselves, why are people so fond of these ideas? Now, it's actually easy to answer that question. It's easy to explain why people are so irrational about aging. It's simply because we have had to be irrational about aging until recently. Since the beginning of civilization, we have known very well that aging is very bad for you, that it's a horrible, horrible thing that's going to happen to you unless something else happens first, like you die of starvation or you get eaten by a tiger or something. So, what do you do in that situation? You don't want to be preoccupied by this terrible, horrible thing that's going to happen to you in the distant future. Therefore, you have to find some way to put it out of your mind and get on with your miserably short life. And of course, the only real way to do that is to make up some story that convinces you that aging is actually a good thing, even though it doesn't seem that way. So, some people would say that the whole of religion is part of that. But certainly we can say that these kinds of excuses for aging, these kinds of scare stories, are absolutely part of that. They are utterly irrational reasons to reject the idea that aging should be tackled. And until I came along, until 20 years ago, that was perfectly sensible. Because we didn't have a plan. We didn't have any plan. We had no idea how to go about defeating aging. Therefore, we had no idea how long it was going to be, how soon we were going to do it. So the sensible assumption was that it wasn't going to be in time for us. Therefore, we had to kind of trick ourselves into putting it out of our minds. But that is not true anymore. Now, we do have a plan. We have a very clear, detailed, concrete plan for how to bring aging under complete medical control. And therefore, this kind of attitude is a huge, huge part of the problem. It is what is slowing down the development of these therapies, because of course it's slowing down the amount of money that is being allocated to the research. It is tragic. It is costing an enormous number of lives. Now, I want to say a few words about what we do at Sense Research Foundation. We are a biomedical research charity, so we have our own laboratories, we have experiments and projects going on in our own place, and we also support financially the research going on in a number of institutions and universities around the US and elsewhere. And all of the work that we do, of course, is directed towards developing these damage repair therapies. We've been pretty successful. So I'm showing you here just a small selection of the papers that we've published in really high-profile journals over the past few years. These papers were real breakthroughs. They really, unlocked areas of research that had been completely static and not moving at all for a long, long time, in some cases more than 10 or 15 years. So we're very proud of all of this. But more than that, we've actually been able to move a lot of our projects far enough along that investors are interested. So anybody in the audience who's an investor who wants to make money, this is probably the way to do it. A variety of companies now exist. This is just the selection of startups that we spun out from our own foundation, which are pursuing all of this work and, of course, moving much faster than they could when they were just funded by philanthropy. And this is our business model now. We bring projects along to a point where some investors, typically, of course, ones who are comfortable with high-risk early-stage investment, are willing to take on these things. And the more we do this, the more progress is going to be made. I should also emphasize that it's not just us. So, hello? There we go. So, here is a list of companies that are not spin-outs from Sense, but still they're doing very closely aligned work, damage repair work. Now, I made this slide, I'm going to say, 6 or 9 months ago. It's way out of date. I've given up updating it because I could fill 5 slides with this list now. It's an explosion of companies doing this, and they're all getting well funded. It's really a different world now. People have got the message that rejuvenation is coming, that damage repair is coming. I want especially to highlight the company at the bottom of the list, Unity Biotechnologies. It's a company that was founded by some friends of mine in the Bay Area, and it is working on the elimination of senescent cells. That was one of the 7 categories I showed you earlier. And a year ago, slightly over a year ago, it raised a Series A of more than $300 million. Now, I want you to understand what that means. In the biotech world, it is not unusual for companies to raise that kind of money. But the stage at which they raise it is completely different. Typically, a biotech company will raise that kind of money when they're in phase 3 of clinical trials. That means they're in the final stage before they get their product approved for medical use and they start to actually make money. Unity were able to raise that amount of money before they had even begun their first clinical trial, phase 1. That is completely unheard of. It's insane. And that tells you exactly how big this industry is going to be. Smart investors are already seeing that the amount of money that this industry is going to generate justifies putting far larger amounts into companies at a far earlier stage than they would ever do in any other situation. Actually, I have some new news about Unity. Literally yesterday, they announced the results of their first clinical trial, phase 1, and those results were really good. They were getting rid of senescent cells in people's knees to address osteoarthritis, especially the pain associated with osteoarthritis, and they got highly significant results. Phase 1, as most of you probably know, is not even designed to demonstrate that something works. It's only designed to demonstrate that something is safe. But they got plenty of data on the extent to which the thing works, and it was really strong data. So that's fantastic news. You know, investors think in many different ways. Some people think, oh, they want to invest early and then they want the company to be acquired by a bigger company, or they want the company to go public on the stock market. It doesn't matter what kind of investor you are. It works for everybody, this. So I'm just going to finish by mentioning that even though the industry is really taking off in a huge way, we still need the non-profit side of things. Sense Research Foundation is still a non-profit, a charity. We are supported entirely by philanthropy. And we matter, because if it were not for people like us, these new companies would not exist. And that's going to carry on being the case. We are the engine room of this industry. So the smartest investors, they're putting money into these companies, but they're also giving money to Sense Research Foundation, because they know that that's the best way that they can be the founding investor in the next startup. That's going to carry on being true, at least for another couple of years. We call our fundraising drive Project 21. As you can see, it's because we think that by 2021, just 2 years from now, most, if not all, of the key therapies that need to be developed to implement comprehensive damage repair will actually be in the clinic, in clinical trials. And that will be a point where we can pretty much declare victory and say that everything is going fine. I will just close by saying I wrote this book 10 or 7 years ago, and it covers all of the biology of rejuvenation in great detail. It was translated into Russian by a number of friends that we have here in Moscow. So if anybody here is interested in getting hold of a copy of this book in Russian, I can make that happen. You just need to write to me at that email address at the bottom of this slide. And of course, we also have a website. You see it there. The website has huge amounts of information. It's written for absolutely everybody. If you don't know anything at all about the biology of aging, there's plenty of stuff there for you. Alternatively, if you're a real expert, you know a lot about it, there's plenty of stuff there for you as well. So I very much encourage you to go there. There's plenty of news there about what we're doing and about what other people are doing. And there's also, of course, a contact form that says, you can write to us and ask us any questions you like. And the final thing that there is on our website, of course, is a nice, big, friendly donate button. Because at the end of the day, the only way that we can get this work done is by support from you. Thank you very much, and I will be happy to answer plenty of questions for the next half hour. But please wait until I get this working, because otherwise I'm not going to be able to understand what anyone Russian actually says. All right, could the interpreter please say something in English so that I can tell that I'm on the...
Yes, sir. Can you hear me? You're welcome.
All right, any questions? Is there a... Yes, good. Everybody, please wait for the microphone because it's a big, noisy hall.
Aubrey, большое спасибо.
Thank you, Aubrey, for your presentation. We're friends on Facebook with you. Thank you for a face-to-face meeting. But my question is, this event is a social innovations forum. It's not just a medical event. So the question is, your publications are very interesting. Are there any projects for young Russian biotechnology experts, maybe university level or even high school students or scientific schools, like projects like how Russian young biotechnologists can input to your projects? And if how, please tell us about that.
Thank you for the question. So first of all, yes, this is a social innovations conference, and for that reason, I spent a little time talking about the social concerns that people have, like overpopulation and inequality of access. So I think it's very important for everybody here to understand that these are not real problems. I did not spend time explaining the reasons why they are not real problems, but I'm happy to do that now if you like. But of course, I have answered those questions many times on videos and interviews, so you probably know them. But to answer your specific question about education, I completely agree with you. Education is really important in this area. We actually, at Sense Research Foundation, have a very successful and high prestige academic initiative where we take undergraduates and we put them into laboratories over the summer for a couple of months, and we educate them about what rejuvenation technology really is. Now, that's just a start. So we would love to be doing that with kids, with young kids, and of course with older people as well. We think that education is absolutely vital. And maybe 2 or 3 years from now, when all of the research that we think needs to be done is already being done in industry, at that point, maybe Sense Research Foundation will be mainly an education organization. So I completely agree with you. Take the microphone. Okay, so I'm going to read this.
Тогда
It is here, offer of cooperation. Dear Aubrey de Gray, you are not yet able to discover the mechanisms of aging and rejuvenate people with the thesis that aging is a disease. I am the author of the theory of the fundamental mechanisms of aging, describing several mechanisms, including the female mechanism of aging and longevity. I offer you a ready-made description of the mechanisms of aging. These are already open to me. I am the first to do this. I offer business cooperation. I am ready to personally develop methods of rejuvenation. I think the scientific discovery of aging mechanisms is a great achievement, and it confirmed different experiments by many authors. Well, what I can certainly tell you is that even if you are the first in this area, you are certainly not the first Russian to think that they have a new theory of aging. The Russians have been doing this more than anybody else for the past 150 years or more. And honestly, you know, okay, let me be clear. I do not think that there are any theories of aging. I think that the best way to understand aging is that it is not just one thing, it is a combination of many different things happening at the same time. Those things are communicating with each other. That's what I call crosstalk earlier on. But still, there are many things. There are many theories of aging that were developed in the 50s and 60s and 70s. And back then, they were competing. You know, some people said this is the right theory and that's the wrong theory. But people don't do that anymore. People say all of the theories are right up to a point. Next question.
hello.
А?
Where are you?
Я здесь.
I'm here, I'm standing here.
У вас проскочил в презентации слайд.
You have slightly mentioned the slide about ethical things, like avoiding aging But you have just swiped it, saying it's nonsense. But there are many ethical claims, and they have foundation, like overpopulation problem, because there is a forecast that by 2050, the human beings will have issues with food. Do you think it's right just to say no to all those issues, saying it's fiddlesticks, but you have a logic, certain logic behind it, a logical rebuttal to each of them? Can you elaborate on this?
The reason that I am so dismissive now about these kinds of things is not because I think they are dumb concerns. It's because I have been asked these questions over and over again, literally more than 1,000 times on stage and on camera and in print for the past 15 or more years. And whenever I answer them, I give the same answers, and nobody ever says, I don't like your answer, it has this problem. They just change the subject. And then the next day or the next week, they'll come back with the exact same question, as if I had never answered it. The thing that really annoys me is a lot of people will come and they'll ask me these questions as if they think that nobody had thought of them before. Right. So that's what really annoys me. There seems to be some kind of compulsion to pretend that these questions cannot be answered, and therefore to ignore the answers. Now, I will do you the honor of giving you, for the 1,000th time, an answer to the first one, the overpopulation question. The answer is simply, we have an overpopulation problem today, not because there is too little space, but because there is too much pollution, too much burning of fossil fuels and creation of greenhouse gases, too much pollution in terms of plastic in the ocean and so on. And all of those things are already being remedied. If we look at the big one, the biggest one of all, climate change, we are already seeing that fossil fuels are being replaced by renewable energy, by solar and wind and so on. And that is not even happening because people have suddenly woken up and said, oh dear, climate change is terribly bad. People are still far too complacent about climate change. But they're still, the switch to renewable energy is still happening simply because new technologies have made renewable energy cheaper than fossil fuels. And it's the same thing with, bacteria that eat plastics or artificial meat and so on. So 20 years, we're not going to have these therapies that eliminate aging for at least 20 years. And by that time, all of these technologies are going to be established. So the carrying capacity of the planet, the number of people that can exist without a big, unacceptable environmental impact, is going to be rising far more rapidly than the population is rising, whether or not we develop the end of aging. Now, this is not controversial. Of course, there are uncertainties in how rapidly these technologies will come along, but it is vanishingly unlikely that they will be so slow that they will not solve the overpopulation problem. And you can see this is a really simple answer, right? Everybody understands this answer when I give it. But they still come back the following day as if it was all a bad dream and I didn't have an answer. That's what pisses me off. Next question. Microphone. Go.
Hello, my name is Eugene and I have two questions. So the first question is that now we realize that people will live longer, but how do you think is it possible that people will become immortal? And the second question, so if we live longer, how do you think which social changes will it bring? So let's say, for example, if right now we are going to live with one person in marriage for 20, 30 years, but if it will be for 100 years, 150, how it will change our behavior?
Yeah, right. Okay, so first of all, I don't even work on longevity. I work on health. Longevity is a side effect of health, right? So, you know, you could say that I work on immorbidity, you know, on eliminating sickness that arises from having been born a long time ago. But that's all I work on. So, you know, I think the word immortality is a problem. We shouldn't be using it. It gets in the way. It actually makes it more difficult for us to bring people on side and to get people to support this work. As regards social changes arising from long lifespans, you know, honestly, I think it's a non-problem, because you have to remember that, you know, we're not going to have any 1,000-year-old people for at least another 900 years, whatever happens, right? People are only going to get older at 1 year per year. So we will adjust to the different demographics and the social implications of those different demographics as time goes on. That's the kind of problem I'd like to have.
Thank you.
Здравствуйте.
Hello, Dr. de Gray. I'm here. I'm Vasily from Moscow Institute of Physics and Technology. My question is about the methodology that we can clearly define the biological age. What are the most promising technologies that are existing today, and how accurately and when we can define our biological age? And that methodology will be critical to know when therapy that could improve the bodily condition, like the age, biological age, reduced. So how can we see it?
Okay, so first of all, I want to split your question in two in a very important way. There is how we define biological age, and there is how we measure biological age. So first of all, we must define it. What do we mean when we use the term biological age? I believe that what we mean is a measure of how long it's going to be before we get chronically sick, before we get some of the pathologies of late life. The younger we are, the longer it's going to be. The older we are, the sooner it's going to be. Now, of course, then we have to say that this is on the assumption that no new therapies are going to come along in the meantime, right? Because otherwise right? So biological age is a bit like artificial intelligence. It's like the definition is shifting with time, with technology. You know, way back, you know, chess used to be thought of as part of artificial intelligence, and these days it's not. You know, in the 50s, compilers were considered to be artificial intelligence. So yeah, so first of all, the definition. That's something we always have to keep in mind, because people are very sloppy about that. But even once you've got your definition, then there's the measuring. And that's, I think, what most of your question was about. So in the 1980s and 90s, the National Institutes of Health in the USA spent a huge amount of money trying to come up with what they called biomarkers of aging, which is the same thing. It's estimates of biological age. And it was a complete bust. Complete bust. Huge amounts of money, totally unsuccessful. These days, people are much more optimistic because we have so much better technology to handle big data. First of all, we can access big data, whether it's epigenetics or metabolomics or proteomics. And secondly, we have these hugely successful ways to analyze that data using new deep learning methods. So now we're pretty close to, how long do I really have? I have 20 minutes, right? So it's 10 past 5 and I was supposed to be until half past. Is that? Okay, good. Just wanted to make it. Okay. So now we're getting to a position where we actually can measure biological age reasonably accurately to within a few years, and it's getting better all the time. And you're totally right that this is a huge asset in developing medicines, because historically, if you wanted to develop medicines for aging, in order to check whether they worked, you had to do a very, 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 very long clinical trial. Now, in principle, you can just look at these markers, these measures of biological age, and that will give you a good answer. It's not perfect, because it's perfectly possible that a medicine could change the biological age as measured by these particular methods without actually changing real biological age, the time until you get sick. And people are worried about that. But all I can tell you is progress is good. Progress is very good. Microphone. Who's got the microphone?
Thank you, Aubrey, for this great information. You told about the good example of the car and the maintenance of the car. What do you think if we look at us as at some engineering machine, and also you told about the damage is also very complex. What do you think if technologies, artificial intelligence will develop also very fast? So what do you think, how many years will require to make our car even faster than we are right now? Thank you.
So basically what your question is, what is my estimate for how far away we are from longevity escape velocity? Longevity escape velocity is the term that I coined 15 years ago to describe the point, the rate at which we need to be improving these therapies in order to stay one step ahead of the problem. And the question is, how soon will we get there? My current estimate is 18 years from now. Of course, that is just a 50-50 estimate. I think we have a 50% chance of getting there in that kind of time frame. I think we have at least a 10% chance of not getting there for 100 years. You know, but so what? 50% is quite enough to be worth fighting for.
Hello. Thank you for good lesson. I also have two questions. My first question, for my first question, please just imagine, don't tell me is it possible or how it possible. Just imagine we have a mechanism that can read our DNA sequence, and each year we have some kind of nanorobots or like that that goes in for each of our cells and rewrite this DNA sequence from the last year. And each year we do like that. Is it enough, you think, today to freeze aging or not? And my second question, what do you think about phenoptosis theory of Vladimir Skulachev? I'm sure you know this Russian biologist.
All right, so yeah, first of all, let me deal with the second part. So yes, Vladimir and I are good friends. He has been on our scientific advisory board for 10 years. He's a fantastic biologist. The idea of phenoptosis is kind of, well, you can interpret it in many different ways. And in fact, there are other people in the West who have been promoting similar ideas with different words. The general idea is kind of right, but it's not so obvious whether it's useful. Essentially, it shows that, it talks about how the phenomenon of aging may be somewhat driven by the inappropriate expression of certain genes which were developed to be useful early in life, and somehow the body did not switch them off when it could. And that is simply because the body did not have enough selective pressure to develop a mechanism for switching them off. So it's not very controversial, really. But what does it mean in terms of what we do? It doesn't really point to a particular mechanism for keeping us healthy. So whether or not that idea is correct or how correct it is doesn't really change what we do in terms of damage repair. And the first part of your question was, remind me.
The first question is? The first question was about the mechanism that can renew our DNA sequence.
Okay, so supposing you had such a thing, I think in due course we may actually develop exactly that. Some robots that go around actually repairing DNA and making it the same as it was in early life. And it may be the best way to eliminate the risk of random loss of function of cells. But I don't think that that kind of loss of function is actually important in aging. The only thing that I think is important in aging today, in a currently normal lifespan, that arises from mutations in the DNA, is cancer. And of course, we can go after cancer later down the chain of events, when cells start to behave in a way that is, that shows that they are cancerous, then we can identify them that way and kill the cells, and that way we don't need to correct the DNA beforehand.
Thank you.
И еще раз.
Once again, welcome to Moscow.
У меня не вопрос.
I don't have a question, but a little addition.
Человек,
A human being,
когда согласно древневедическому
according to the
правильно выстроен,
ancient culture,
или что вы сказали,
is a wise,
и духовный.
high morale and spiritual guy. So a human being, humanity is not there on earth because not so many people are wise, have high morale and high spiritual ones. The right persons have to always be young. Long live perennial youth. Welcome to Moscow.
Okay?
Aubrey, спасибо за вашу деятельность.
Thank you for what you do, because I think it's the only activities that should be done by the mankind in the world. I mean, this is the only right and the only one thing that should be done. My question is,
Скоро, по вашему
how soon do you think will we be able to see
массовом рынке технологий,
mass market technology
лекарств,
of medical drugs
обладающие радикальным действием по
that
продлению наших
is radically extending our lives? So in how many years will we be able to do that? 10, 15 years or something?
Я имею в виду
I mean,
препараты, которые разрабатываются в рамках
preparations that are being made by your foundation as well as the medications that your colleagues are working on, scientists. And in general, like 30-year-old guys, how long will they live if using those things?
All right, so in order to answer that question, let me start with my answer to the question from over there. How soon do I think these therapies are going to be developed? And so I say that we have a 50% chance of getting there within 18 years at this point. So your question is, beyond that, how soon will they become widely available, right? Now, this is very important to understand. At the moment, when we look at high-tech, expensive new medicines, we see that there is a long lag, that they come available very expensive to a few people, and then it's a long time before they become widely available because they get cheap enough. I don't think it's going to be like that this time around. Here's why. It's simply because society, humanity, is going to know that these therapies are coming. I think that we have maybe a 50% chance of getting these therapies to be developed within, let's say, 18 years, but I think we have at least a 50% chance of getting to a point within 5 years from now where everybody knows that they're coming. That will be the result of small breakthroughs in the laboratory as well as breakthroughs in the clinic. And if that is true, then in the time between those things, starting 5 years from now, ending 18 years from now, everyone's going to be working to ensure this. Remember that nearly all of technology is developed in democracies, where poor people have the same number of votes as wealthy people. That means that it will become impossible to get elected unless you have a commitment to spend taxpayers' money on the development of enough infrastructure, training medical personnel, not just accelerating the research, all the other stuff, so as to ensure that when these therapies do actually arrive, they can immediately be made available to everybody. And this also makes sense, and this is very important, it also makes sense even if you ignore the humanitarian side and the electoral side. Even if you just look at the economic argument, the mercenary economic argument, it's still obvious that these therapies will pay for themselves very quickly, very many times over. They will allow the elderly to continue to contribute wealth to society. They will allow the kids of the elderly to be more productive because they're not looking after their sick parents. You know, everyone will be more prosperous. So this is absolutely certain not to be a case where we have to wait for the general public to have access.
Thank you.
Hello. Are there any plans of collaboration between Russian scientific collectives and the Sensory Research Foundation?
Oh, sure. There already are. So we have especially collaborations with, on the advocacy side. Elena, stand up. So I have here Elena Milova, who is a fantastic part of our community. She's based here in Moscow, and she's a primary member of an organization called the Life Extension Advocacy Foundation. You know, it's really important to have very good communicators in this area. I do the best I can, but I'm only one guy, right? So we need a lot of those people, and Elena is a huge example of that. On the scientific side, we have very successful, important companies being created in Russia that are collaborating with Western companies, like in silico medicine, created by Alex Shavaronkov, who's from here. We also have organizations here in Russia that are working to create more such things, the Science for Life Extension Foundation, for example. And we also have many Russians who have moved abroad and are doing great work elsewhere. For example, let's just take Vadim Gladyshev. He works at Harvard University, one of the most important universities in the world. He has exactly the same attitude as I do to what aging is and how to fix it. He's doing fantastic work. You know, many, many more examples. The Russians are really doing their bit. So thank you all. And we have 5 minutes, so I guess 2 or 3 more questions.
Скажите, пожалуйста.
You're always telling about stem cells, about oncology, but I'm interested about a social disease in Russia which is not curable, tuberculosis. Can you advise how it can be cured?
Well, I do not know specifically how tuberculosis can be cured, but I do know that articulate and powerful people who understand the problems of health in this country have become very effective. I would like to highlight another friend of mine, Daria Kalturina, who I don't think she's here right now, but she lives in Moscow. She is now focused very strongly on the longevity movement, both in Russia and worldwide. But I mention her because she led the campaign that caused legislation to be passed in the Duma to limit alcohol abuse, and also a separate campaign that caused legislation to be passed in the Duma to limit tobacco consumption and sale to children and so on. So we have very powerful, very effective people in this country who are able to influence public policy in a way that does genuinely make a big difference to public health. Of course, Russia has a long way to go to come to the level of health that we see in the West, but you're catching up. I feel that the future is strong.
Hello? I'm Ayabek. I'm a veterinary doctor. I'm dealing with biomodernization of human beings. But now my question is as follows. Longevity is a natural process, and longevity using medical devices like hybridization, artificial heart, artificial kidney, we're also extending people's life. And one of billionaires has changed his heart 5 times. He was like a keyboard, you know. And now, is it ethical or not? There is another movement, avatar production for replicating yourself, like replicating your kidney, your liver, so you can do whatever you want to grow using biotechnology and implants. So that line of activities, avatar, how ethical it is, in your opinion? Because how to resolve this using legislation or something else?
I don't really think that this is an ethical question. I think it is more a practical question. Is the use of non-biological approaches to health what people actually want? Now, in the case of, for example, artificial hearts or cochlear implants or even glasses, of course, people are voting with their feet. They are definitely accepted as ethical and useful and wonderful. But I think that at the moment, most people would say that it's not good enough to be uploaded, to become an avatar. They want to continue to be made out of meat. And so that's what we're working on. However, attitudes may change. I am open-minded about that. One more question.
Hello, thank you very much indeed for your time. It's been interesting. Having come to Russia, you have probably noticed that we are on the 120th place in terms of life expectancy. America is on the 40th place. Japanese are the highest. Europe are not too bad. But what do you think? Life expectancy 64 years in Russia, 73 for women. 2 questions. Your opinion, how are women are managing to live longer than men because they give birth to children and they're quite vulnerable? And secondly, don't you think that we have to put more efforts for learning to reach up 80 years of age and then try to reach 100, rather than trying to live until a centennial age?
All right, so I don't really have a good answer to the first question about the difference between men and women. This is, of course, a very old question. We have known for many, many decades that women live longer than men, and still nobody really knows why. There are many hypotheses, but they don't live all that much longer. 5 or 10 years, yes, it's significant, but we want to do much better than that. Now, that's the same for differences between countries. We see, as you say, that, for example, the USA is down around number 40 in the league table of longevity, but the difference between the life expectancy of USA and the life expectancy of Japan is only about 5 years, right? So it's, again, the kind of same order of magnitude as between men and women. If we're talking about increasing longevity by 50 years, it's a whole different deal. Moreover, most of the countries, in fact, almost all of the countries that have a low life expectancy are catching up. So right now, there are no countries in the whole world with an average lifespan of less than 50. None. If you take out sub-Saharan Africa, then there are no countries that have a lifespan less than 60. The lowest is Afghanistan at 60 and a half or something like that. Now, for sure, we need to do more, no question. But what you said was, should we maybe do more now and not worry about increasing the lifespan of the best countries until the other countries have caught up a lot? I think that is completely wrong and very dangerous. Let me put this in 2 ways. First of all, the countries that have the longest lifespan are the ones that have the biggest health problems, because the things that kill people late in life are the things that kill people slowly. You have Alzheimer's for many, many years before you die. Whereas if you die of malaria, you go from being perfectly healthy to being dead very quickly, right? And same with tuberculosis mostly, things like that. So, yeah, I think we have to accept that actually solving the problem of early death creates a new problem of death around 80, and that's a bigger problem because it lasts longer. We totally should not be deprioritizing it. The other thing is more kind of general. If we only focus on the trailing edge of progress, the people who are at the back of the field, then in the end, everything goes more slowly. It's only by also focusing on the leading edge that the trailing edge is able to continue to move forward rapidly. All right, thank you very much, everybody.